Wasn't that wonderful, you know? Imagine the day when all the dogmas die. It will be an amazing amount of freedom and an opportunity for us to be very, very creative. I'm about to introduce a young man to you who I find personally amazing. Drew Dellinger has a poem called Meet Me at the Confluence Where You Flow Into Me. And I can't tell Drew how many ways I've used that poem. Ladies, y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? But he is a wonderfully creative young man that I've had the pleasure of being in the same program with at things such as the Praises for the World concert that was done in Marin County in California right after George Bush had announced the war in Iraq. And it stands out for me as the performance that I prepared all my life to be a part of, because we had an auditorium of hundreds of people who chanted along with us in the background for 2.5 hours nonstop, and we had to call the police to get people out of the audience. Never had a show like that where the people don't want to leave? You know, it was one of the most amazing things, and every culture in the world was represented in different prayers and songs for peace. So Drew was an important part of that. And so you are about to experience a young man who really increases my optimism and my faith in the future. There are more of him around. I can go lay my old ass down and not worry about it. You know, isn't it important to know that? Okay. So Drew Dellinger is a PhD. He's an internationally known speaker, writer, poet, and teacher who's lectured and taught extensively across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. He's the author of the award-winning poetry collection, Love Letter to the Milky Way, and the upcoming book, A Cosmology of Connection, Martin Luther King, Ecological Thinker. He's been called a national treasure by Joanna Macy, a deep and courageous poet by Alice Walker, and one of the most creative, courageous, and prophetic voices of his generation by Cornel West. Please welcome Drew Dellinger.
Ions 2015, how y'all doing? What's up? Oh, this is exciting. We are standing on a planet that is shooting through space, and it's time we started acting like it. Imagine nations with freed imaginations. Imagine nations with freed imaginations. It's time for she who sees the way to seize the day, seize the hour, seize the levers of power, and be the change. A new page, a new stage of drama. We need a movement of movements in the age of Obama, because not even a Messiah could cure this empire. We need all of us to face all of the past and move past it. I ain't gonna study war no more, except in history classes. Globalized liberation, planetize the movement. You can't stop the Earth's revolution. But the snafu was the half who would settle for half-truth. I said the snafu was the half who would settle for half-truth, so I'm at it again with a pad and a pen. Some things deserve to dissolve, and the last shall be first, and vice versa. You are floating on a planet. Act accordingly. cryosphere melting, 10 trillion tears to a vanishing planet. Earth, dream blossom of the cosmos, silent universe speaking in species. Every cell is intelligent. Every cell is intelligent. Cultivate bioluminescence. The breath is the bridge. Imagine nations with freed imaginations. We are standing on a planet that is floating in space, and it's time we started acting like it. Globalize liberation, planetize the movement. You can't stop the Earth's revolution. Thank you. In the last months of his life, on Christmas Eve, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. stood in his pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta and told the Sunday morning congregation, if we are to have peace on earth, we must develop a world perspective. Yes, as nations and individuals, we are interdependent, King said. Then, with a sentence that could easily have been uttered by John Muir or Rachel Carson, King stated, it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, he preached in his booming voice, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly, yes, sir, someone responded, affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality, he said, emphasizing each syllable in the words interrelated structure of reality. Exactly 1 year later, on Christmas Eve 1968, Commander Frank Borman and his crew were on their 4th orbit around the moon when Borman looked up and saw the Earth coming around the left side of the lunar horizon. "Oh my God," he exclaimed. "Look at that picture over there. Here's the Earth coming up. Wow, is that pretty?" The photographs taken by the Apollo 8 astronauts of the radiant living Earth, resplendent in space, juxtaposed against the barren lunar landscape and a dark expanse, floating, infinitely beautiful, sunlit against the black cosmos, wet with oceans and alive with swirling clouds, transformed human consciousness. King never saw the photographs of Earth from space, but his vision presaged its message of interconnectedness and unity. King's phrase, network of mutuality, is as good a definition of ecology as any offered by an ecologist. On that Sunday morning, he anticipated much of the ecological consciousness and environmental concerns of the next 50 years and the links between ecology, social justice, and cosmology that are so vital to our present moment and our path into the future. This is the way our universe is structured, King said to his church exactly 12 months before Apollo 8 captured the famous Earthrise photograph that would help catalyze a wave of planetary thinking and ecological awareness. This is its interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on Earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. In his Christmas sermon on peace, King gave voice to a cosmology of connection, a worldview of interdependence and interrelation. So that's what I want to talk about this morning. Is how do we move from our current cosmology, our current worldview, our current paradigm in the modern West to a cosmology of connection? We've got a lot, fortunately, we're in a crisis of cosmology, right? We're in a crisis of worldview. I know many of y'all are familiar with the term cosmology, so I don't need to labor this, but it's not a widely familiar term in the mainstream, but I know we're here at the IONS conference. We've got cosmologists. We've got ecological systems thinkers. We've got people interested in consciousness and spirituality. We've got people interested in bending spoons with their minds. We got some spoon benders in here, right? But I know we have people deeply interested in the scientific story of the universe, as well as the sacred story of the cosmos and the universe, and the ways that these are intermingling and interpenetrating. But cosmology is not a word that's generally known in our kind of mainstream culture. So let me throw out a couple definitions. The standard definition, scientific definition, would be cosmology. Of course, it just means the study of the cosmos, most literally, right? But cosmology is the study of the origin and development of the universe as a whole, in its entirety. More broadly, though, cosmology is the story that a culture tells itself about how the world came to be and how we fit into it. Now, my great teacher in this was Thomas Berry. And Thomas Berry used to say that, he was the one that really introduced me to this concept that we needed a new cosmology in the modern West. That the worldview of Western civilization had been based on a separation between humans and the natural world, had been based on anthropocentrism or human-centeredness. Tom Berry used to say, we give all the rights and all the value to the human, no rights and no value to the more than human. Our culture, all of the institutions of our culture, the religious institutions, the political institutions, the economic institutions, the educational institutions, all of these, Thomas Berry said, were deeply anthropocentric. They perceive and perpetuate a radical discontinuity, a radical split between the human and the earth. And he said this was the great tragedy of our culture. This was the shadow side of the Western tradition. And this was the root cause of the ecological crisis. In 1978, Thomas Berry published an essay called The New Story. And it starts out like this. It's all a question of story. We are in trouble just now because we do not have a good story. We are in between stories. The old story, the account of how the world came to be and how we fit into it, is no longer effective, yet we have not learned the new story. 1978, Thomas Berry published The New Story. So, if our modern Western civilization is based on a cosmology of disconnection and separation, and if this may be seen as the root cause of the ecological crisis and perhaps some of our social crises, then where do we turn to overcome this worldview of disconnection, separation, alienation, fragmentation? Where are the resources that we can draw upon to help foster an emerging cosmology of connection? The good news is there are plenty of resources to draw upon. Because, in fact, as my friend Charlene Spretnak points out, modern Western culture is the only culture in the entire history of the planet to have made this turn and to have made this move and to have convinced themselves that they were separate from the earth. Modern Western culture is the only culture in the history of history that ever taught its children that nature was dead, that nature was inanimate, that we are separate from the earth, that we walk around on top of the earth. As Spretnak points out, every other culture in the history of earth taught that nature was alive, that nature was vital, that nature was animate, that we were connected to nature, that nature was the source of our being, and that we were embedded in this living system of nature. So in fact, we can look at all of the indigenous traditions and find a cosmology of connection. We can look at the goddess civilizations from millennia past and find a cosmology of connection. We can look to Eastern wisdom and find a cosmology of connection. We can look to African wisdom and find a cosmology of connection. As one scholar pointed out, in the Navajo worldview, everything is connected to everything else. Another scholar says that in Africa, participation is the fundamental aesthetic in African culture. In fact, in African culture, there is no meaning without participation. So every other culture in the history of the world has the interrelated, interdependent cosmology of connectedness that we need. And we need to honor these indigenous and African traditions as we create in a postmodern moment an emerging cosmology of connection. There are new, when I first got into this in the early 90s, the term, we used to use the term new cosmology. Remember that? Y'all remember that? We talk about the new cosmology all the time. And it's a great and powerful term, but it's got some problematic aspects to it. The problematic part is really the word new. Right? There's a kind of one-panel political cartoon that I saw a couple years ago. It shows two Native American men sitting at a diner, and one of them's reading the newspaper, and he's telling the other one, "It says here that science has discovered that the earth is alive and that everything's connected." The other Native American man is sitting there shaking his head saying, "What will they discover next?" So I think it's very important that we acknowledge the leadership of indigenous traditions as we create and weave this emerging cosmology of connection. Yes, there are other threads that we're weaving together. We have tremendous new learning and wisdom coming from science. We have chaos and complexity theory and new sciences of interconnectedness. We have photographs of galaxies. It's a stunning achievement. I don't ever for 1 second want to overlook or diminish that achievement. We have photographs of galaxies. And at the same time, this is an ancient understanding. It would be an injustice for us as a white-dominated mainstream Western culture to be like, look at this new information we've discovered. That would be perpetuating the same kind of centuries of erasure that we've seen so often. So as we build this new emerging cosmology of connection, this new worldview of interrelation and interdependence, we need to honor the indigenous wisdom, the ancient wisdom, the goddess wisdom, the Eastern wisdom, right? Now, I think the photograph of Earth from space, that Apollo 8 photograph, is a transcendent moment. That photograph is a cosmology. It's hard to look at that photograph. It's hard to meditate, reflect on, and be with that photograph and maintain a cosmology or a worldview of separation and disconnection. It's hard to maintain a radical discontinuity, as Barry says, between the human and the natural world when you're looking at that photograph of the Earth from space. I remember being at a conference, and the first time I met Thomas Berry, actually, in 1990, Joanna Macy spoke that night. She showed the photograph of the Earth from space. She said, "That's you. That's what you look like from space." So that Earthrise photograph, then the blue marble photograph from 1972, these are selfies. And if you look at the photographs of the Gemini missions prior to the Apollo missions, they have some beautiful photographs, but they're too close, in a certain sense. Some of them you can see the edge of the Earth, but they were too close to get a whole view of the planet. So the Apollo mission was like a selfie stick. The Apollo missions were a selfie stick that enabled us to get far enough away to capture a view of ourselves in our full beauty. So My work has been about the intersections of ecology, social justice, and cosmology. The way that I phrase it is that we need to build a movement that connects ecology, social justice, and cosmology using the power of dream, the power of story, the power of art, and the power of action. Let me say a little bit about the connections between ecology, cosmology, and social justice. One of the connections is the fact that I think both ecology and social justice are deeply related to cosmology, to worldview, right? We can look at the ecological crisis as a dysfunctional worldview, as a crisis of cosmology, but we can also look at social injustices, oppression, systemic racism, patriarchy, misogyny, militarism, poverty. These can also be seen as a crisis of cosmology, as dysfunctional worldviews. So we've been seeing in recent decades, and more people are feeling and articulating and sensing, and we're seeing these movements come together that are linking ecology and social justice. Hurricane Katrina, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. Is Hurricane Katrina an ecological catastrophe or a social justice catastrophe? Is the climate crisis an ecological crisis or a social justice crisis? Right? So this is part of what I think is so exciting about the worldview of Martin Luther King, is that he's making these links. He's making these links between social justice and worldview. And through my research, I've come to discover and be able to build the case that we can look at King as an ecological thinker. We can look at King as a cosmological thinker. He had a deep interest in the universe. In the middle of the Montgomery bus boycott, King gives a sermon in which he says, "Do you realize that in the last 5 minutes since I've been talking, you and I and our Earth have traveled 5,000 miles through space? Do you realize that our planet is moving so fast that even the fastest jet would be left 66,000 miles behind in the first hour of a space race? And do you realize that although the sun looks near, it is in fact 93 million miles away?" This is King in the middle of the Montgomery bus boycott, talking about our situatedness cosmologically in the solar system. In February 1960, King goes to Durham, North Carolina, where the sit-in movement has just exploded in the last 2 weeks, starting in Greensboro, North Carolina, February 1st. King goes and meets with these students in Durham who are about to go out and protest with the direct action sit-in. And he says, "As you go out today, know that all the stars in their course are supporting you. And we have cosmic companionship in the struggle for justice." Thank you. Dr. King was also a deeply ecological thinker. He was constantly talking about interconnectedness, interdependence, mutuality. He said, "I can't be who I'm meant to be until you are who you're meant to be." He said he even made this took me 15 years of research, and I don't have the time to fully go into it, but do check out my website where I have an article up called Martin Luther King, Ecological Thinker. And it's truedellinger.org. And so King said, at one point, King says, "One cannot be concerned just with civil rights. It's very nice to drink milk at an integrated lunch counter, but not when there's strontium-90 in it." At another point, King says, "It would be foolhardy for me to work for integrated schools or integrated lunch counters and not be concerned about the survival of the world in which to be integrated." So Dr. King gives us a model of making these links and making these connections between ecology, social justice, and cosmology. I think this is very important. It's very important, if I may say a word, to us as a predominantly white gathering. It's very important that we support this movement for Black lives. You see, the phrase Black Lives Matter is a challenge to the worldview of the modern West. It's a challenge to 5 centuries of white supremacist, racist worldview, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Just in the last couple of days, a anti-feminist, misogynist gunman went into a movie theater where a feminist comedy was playing and shot several people. This is a crisis of cosmology. This is a crisis of worldview. This is the work that we're called to connect ecology and social justice, building a new worldview of community, justice, compassion, connection, self-determination, respect, and love. Let me just close. There's so much more I want to share, and of course, but let me close with a poem that I would like to dedicate to Sandra Bland, who is being laid to rest today in Illinois. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, "What did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew?" I'm riding home on the Colma train. I've got the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I have teams of scientists feeding me data daily and pleading I immediately turn it into poetry. I want just this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. I am the desirous earth, equidistant to the underworld and the flesh of the stars. I am everything already lost. The moment the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos, I use words to instigate silence. I'm a hieroglyphic stairway in a buried Mayan city, suddenly exposed by a hurricane. A satellite circling Earth, finding dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert. I am telescopes that see back in time. I'm the precession of the equinoxes, the magnetism of the spiraling sea. I'm riding home on the Colma train with the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I am myths where violets blossom from blood like dying and rising gods. I'm the boundary of time, soul encountering soul and tongues of fire. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep because my great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, "What did you do while the earth was unraveling?" I want just this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. So friends, let's build a movement. Thank you. Let's build a movement that connects ecology, social justice, and cosmology. Let's planetize the movement. If we change the worldview, we change the world. Thank you. Thank you, Ions. Thank you.